"Ma'am, you need to leave this aircraft right now." The words sliced through the first-class cabin so sharply that even the hum of the jet engines seemed to fade for a moment. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Phones slowly lifted. And in seat 2A, Monica Reynolds didn't move an inch. At 8:14 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Flight 728 to New York should have been preparing for departure. Instead, dozens of passengers found themselves watching something they would never forget. A tall airport security supervisor stood in the aisle, his expression hard and impatient. Beside him, senior flight attendant Nicole Harper folded her arms across her Navy uniform and stared directly at Monica as if she were a problem that needed to be removed. "You've been asked multiple times," Nicole said loudly. "You do not belong in executive class." A murmur swept through the cabin. Monica looked up calmly. She wore dark jeans, a black sweater, and simple leather flats. No designer logos. No expensive jewelry. No entourage. Nothing about her appearance matched the image many people expected when they imagined wealth. But what stood out most wasn't what she wore. It was what she didn't do. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't panic. She simply looked out the window at the sheets of rain rolling across the runway. The security supervisor stepped closer. "Ma'am, this is your final notice." Across the aisle, a middle-aged passenger lowered his newspaper. "She has a boarding pass," he said carefully. I watched her scan it. Nicole turned toward him immediately. "Sir, this matter has already been reviewed." The passenger frowned but fell silent. Monica finally spoke. Her voice was calm enough to make the tension in the cabin feel even heavier. "Then perhaps you reviewed the wrong passenger." Nicole laughed softly. "No, we reviewed exactly the right one." The air inside the cabin changed. It wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged. Several passengers exchanged uneasy looks. A young woman near row 3 discreetly started recording on her phone. Another passenger opened a social media app and began live streaming. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. The security supervisor gestured toward the front exit. "Let's go." Monica slowly gathered her tablet from the seat beside her. Every movement was deliberate. Every movement was controlled. She stood without resistance. Yet somehow, she looked less like a passenger being removed and more like someone observing an experiment she had already seen before. As she stepped into the aisle, Nicole shook her head and muttered loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. "People always think they can sit wherever they want." Monica stopped for half a second. Not long enough to create a scene. Just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Then she turned. Her eyes met Nicole's. "No," she said quietly. "People sit where they paid to sit." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even Nicole seemed caught off guard by the response. Monica resumed walking toward the aircraft door. Behind her, phones continued recording. Ahead of her, airport personnel waited near the jet bridge. Rain hammered against the windows. The aircraft remained frozen at the gate. And as Monica crossed the threshold between the cabin and the jet bridge, she glanced once over her shoulder. Her expression never changed. Her voice never rose. But the words she left behind landed harder than any argument ever could. "This airline is about to learn the cost of humiliation." The rain continued to streak across the tall windows of Terminal 3 as Monica Reynolds stepped into the executive lounge reserved for premium travelers. Around her, airport announcements echoed through polished hallways, rolling over the sound of luggage wheels and hurried footsteps. Yet Monica seemed untouched by any of it. She settled into a leather chair near the window and placed her tablet on the table beside her. There was no frustration in her face. No anger. No urgency. The people who glanced her way saw only a woman quietly waiting for her next flight. They had no idea who she was. That was exactly how Monica preferred it. For nearly 20 years, she had traveled the country without announcing herself. No personal assistants trailing behind her. No photographers. No security detail. Wealth had taught her many lessons, but one of the most important was simple. The moment people knew who you were, they stopped showing you who they were. Monica had built her career watching carefully, listening carefully, learning what happened when power was invisible. At 47 years old, she was one of the most influential figures in American finance, though very few people would have recognized her walking through an airport. Her firm, Reynolds Capital, managed billions of dollars in strategic investments across transportation, infrastructure, and aviation. Entire companies waited for meetings with her team. Entire industries watched her decisions. Yet this morning she had boarded that aircraft wearing a black sweater and carrying her own bag because appearances had never interested her. Results did. Across the lounge, a television mounted above the bar displayed a financial news segment. A reporter discussed market uncertainty and corporate debt restructuring. Several travelers watched with casual interest. Monica barely glanced up. Her phone vibrated once. A message appeared on the screen. It came from her executive assistant, Lauren Mitchell. "Are you all right?" Monica read the message and smiled faintly. Her response was short. "I am perfectly fine." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Social media videos are spreading." Monica looked toward the window again. The reflection staring back at her appeared calm, almost detached. She had seen situations like this before. Different city, different faces, same assumptions, same certainty from people who believed they could identify who belonged and who did not. A young businessman seated nearby suddenly lowered his phone. His eyes widened. He looked at Monica, then back at his screen, then back at Monica again. Recognition flickered across his face, but uncertainty followed immediately after. Surely it could not be her. Surely someone that powerful would not be sitting alone in an airport lounge after being removed from a flight. Monica returned her attention to the rain outside. She remembered something her father once told her when she was 14 years old. Never chase respect. Let people reveal whether they have any. The memory lingered. Around her, the airport continued moving at full speed. Travelers rushed to gates. Employees pushed carts down long corridors. Aircraft taxied across wet runways. Everything appeared normal. Yet beneath that ordinary morning, a storm was already forming. Monica knew it. She could feel it. Somewhere inside the airline's headquarters, executives would soon begin asking questions. Somewhere inside the company, people would begin reviewing reports, videos, and witness statements. And somewhere very soon, someone would discover exactly who had been escorted off that aircraft. Monica picked up her coffee and took a slow sip. Then she glanced once more at the message from Lauren. Without hesitation, she typed a final response. "Do not intervene yet. Let them discover the truth on their own." 10 minutes after Monica Reynolds entered the executive lounge, the situation on Flight 728 had already begun to unravel in ways the airline employees never anticipated. What had started as a routine departure delay was quickly becoming the most discussed topic inside the terminal. Near Gate B14, clusters of passengers stood around charging stations and coffee kiosks replaying videos on their phones. Every recording showed the same thing. A calm passenger with a valid boarding pass being told she did not belong. Yet with every retelling, the story somehow changed. The airline staff had their version. The passengers had another. And the gap between them was growing wider by the minute. Inside the gate operations office, Nicole Harper sat across from gate manager Stephen Caldwell. A stack of printed reports lay scattered across the desk. Stephen rubbed his forehead. "Walk me through it again," he said. Nicole folded her arms. The passenger refused instructions. Stephen looked down at the report. "Multiple witnesses say she complied." Nicole's jaw tightened. "She created a disruption." "The videos do not show a disruption." Stephen tapped the screen of his tablet. "They show a woman sitting quietly." Nicole looked away. She was in the wrong seat. Stephen frowned. "Her boarding pass shows seat 2A. For a moment, neither spoke. The office suddenly felt smaller. Across the hall, another supervisor was speaking with airport security. Their version sounded different again. One officer claimed there had been concerns about verification. Another suggested confusion regarding ticket classification. A third mentioned possible seating discrepancies. Every explanation sounded less convincing than the one before it. The truth was becoming difficult to locate beneath the growing pile of excuses. Meanwhile, passengers continued posting clips online. Comments multiplied by the thousands. Some questioned the airline's behavior. Others demanded answers. More than a few people pointed out that no one seemed capable of explaining exactly why Monica had been removed from the flight in the first place. Back in the executive lounge, Monica remained perfectly composed. A financial newspaper rested unopened beside her coffee. The television overhead now displayed a discussion about customer relations in major airlines. The timing was almost ironic. Nearby travelers occasionally glanced toward her. Some recognized her face. Most did not. Yet everyone sensed there was something unusual about the woman sitting quietly by the window while the entire terminal buzzed around her. Her phone vibrated again. Lauren Mitchell. Another message. They are changing their story. Monica read the words without reacting. She typed back immediately. Let them. Truth does not need help surviving. Several hundred feet away, a young flight attendant named Emma Brooks stared at a computer screen in a crew operations room. She had been on board during the incident. She had watched everything unfold. And unlike the others, she could still see the original passenger manifest displayed in front of her. Seat 2A. Monica Reynolds. Confirmed. Cleared. Verified. Emma swallowed hard. The record had never changed. The boarding pass had never been invalid. The reservation had never been questioned by the system. The problem had not come from the computer. It had come from people. She looked around the room. Senior employees continued discussing statements and reports. Nobody seemed interested in what actually happened anymore. They were focused on defending decisions already made. Emma stared at Monica's name on the screen once more. Then she quietly reached for her phone. Somewhere between protecting a mistake and protecting the truth, a line had been crossed. And for the first time that morning, someone inside the airline was preparing to speak up. Emma Brooks sat alone in the crew operations room, staring at the glowing monitor in front of her. Around her, conversations drifted through the office like static. Supervisors discussed procedures. Managers reviewed statements. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Yet none of those sounds could pull her attention away from the passenger manifest on the screen. Monica Reynolds. Seat 2A. Confirmed. Verified. Cleared. Every record matched. Every timestamp aligned. There was no missing information. No system error. No security alert. No ticket problem. The facts were sitting directly in front of her, plain and undeniable. Emma leaned back slowly. She had worked for the airline for less than 18 months. Long enough to understand how quickly people learned to protect decisions once they were made. Short enough to still remember why honesty mattered. Across the room, Nicole Harper continued speaking with two managers. The passenger became argumentative, Nicole insisted. The crew followed protocol. Emma looked down at her screen again. The record told a different story. She remembered the woman sitting quietly in seat 2A. She remembered the boarding pass scanning green. She remembered hearing comments that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with assumptions. The memory sat heavily in her chest. At that moment, her phone buzzed. A message from another flight attendant appeared. Have you seen social media? Emma opened the link. Thousands of comments filled the screen. Passengers who had witnessed the incident were posting videos from different angles. Some clips showed Monica sitting calmly before departure. Others captured passengers questioning why she was being removed despite having valid credentials. The story was spreading faster than anyone inside the airline realized. Emma glanced toward the operations office window. Beyond the glass, travelers hurried through. The terminal carrying coffee cups and rolling suitcases. Most had no idea they were walking past the center of a growing crisis. She took a deep breath and opened a secure internal database. One search. One name. Monica Reynolds. The result appeared almost instantly. Emma's eyes widened. She read the profile once, then twice, then a third time. The information was restricted to executive partnership records, but the designation beside Monica's name was impossible to ignore. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Suddenly, the entire morning looked different. The confidence, the calm, the complete absence of panic. None of it had been accidental. Across the terminal, Monica remained seated near the window of the executive lounge. Rain continued sliding down the glass in silver lines. Travelers moved around her in constant motion, yet she appeared completely still. A businessman approached cautiously. "Excuse me," he said. "Were you on flight 728? Monica looked up and offered a polite smile. "I was." The man hesitated. "I saw what happened. I just wanted to say it did not seem right." Monica nodded once. "Thank you. Are you going to file a complaint?" he asked. Monica looked back toward the runway where aircraft lights glowed through the rain. "Some situations correct themselves," she replied. The man walked away, uncertain what she meant. Back in the operations office, Emma stared at the executive profile on her screen one final time. Then she reached for her phone. For hours, people had been protecting a story that was falling apart. Now someone was finally preparing to protect the truth. Emma Brooks sat motionless as the executive profile remained open on her screen. Outside the crew office, people continued moving through the terminal as if nothing had changed. Inside, everything had changed. The name Monica Reynolds was no longer just another passenger record. It carried the weight of a truth that few people in the building understood. Emma closed her eyes briefly and thought back to the moment she had watched Monica standing in the aisle of the aircraft. Calm, patient, unshaken. At the time it had seemed unusual. Now it made perfect sense. People who knew exactly who. They were rarely felt the need to prove it. Across the terminal, Monica remained seated by the window as rain painted long silver trails across the glass. Her coffee had grown cold. She did not seem to notice. The runway lights reflected in her eyes, pulling her backward through time. 29 years earlier, Monica had been 17 years old, standing inside another airport hundreds of miles away. She still remembered the smell of coffee and jet fuel mixing in the air. She remembered clutching a valid ticket her mother had saved for months to afford. She remembered the excitement of flying for the first time. Most of all, she remembered the employee who looked at her ticket, then at her face, and frowned. "Are you sure you are in the right boarding group?" he had asked. The words sounded harmless on the surface. They were not. Monica remembered the people who walked past without questions. She remembered the extra scrutiny, the suspicious glances, the feeling that she needed to justify her presence in a place where her ticket had already granted permission. That day ended without confrontation, but the lesson stayed with her. Again and again throughout her life, she encountered different versions of the same assumption. Different voices, different uniforms, different settings. The message never changed. You do not belong here. At 23, a lender questioned whether she truly owned her growing business. At 28, a hotel employee assumed she was attending a conference as support staff rather than a speaker. At 36, a luxury retailer followed her through a showroom while ignoring other customers. Each incident became fuel. Every doubt became motivation. Every closed door became another reason to build something nobody could take away. Monica opened her eyes and looked back at the rain. The airport around her faded into the background. She had spent decades learning that prejudice rarely announced itself honestly. It hid behind policy. It hid behind procedure. It hid behind phrases that sounded reasonable until examined closely. What happened that morning was not new. That was what made it disappointing. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was not Lauren. The message came from an unknown number. "My name is Emma Brooks. I work for the airline. I saw what happened. Your boarding pass was valid. I have proof." Monica read the message carefully. Then she looked toward the terminal concourse where travelers continued hurrying toward their gates. Somewhere inside this massive airport, someone had decided that truth mattered more than convenience. A faint smile touched her face. For the first time all morning, the balance had begun to shift. Not because of power, not because of money, because one person had finally chosen honesty over silence. Monica read Emma's message twice before setting her phone down beside her coffee. The words were simple, direct, honest. In a building filled with explanations and excuses, honesty suddenly stood out like a spotlight. Outside the executive lounge, the terminal continued operating as though it were an ordinary morning. Flights boarded. Travelers hurried toward gates. Announcements echoed from overhead speakers. Yet beneath that routine activity, pressure was beginning to build. Monica could almost feel it. Her phone rang. "Lauren Mitchell." Monica answered immediately. "I received a message from one of their employees," she said. Lauren paused. Then someone finally decided to tell the truth. Monica looked through the rain-covered glass toward the runway. "Yes." Lauren lowered her voice. "Do you want me to begin?" Monica did not answer right away. She watched a departing aircraft disappear into gray clouds. Then she spoke 4 words. "Freeze the renewal package." Silence followed on the line. Not because Lauren was surprised, because she understood exactly what those words meant. Months earlier, Reynolds Capital had entered negotiations involving a $5 billion financing agreement designed to stabilize the airline's future expansion plans. Routes, aircraft acquisitions, debt restructuring, long-term growth. The package represented one of the largest opportunities in the company's history. Entire executive teams had spent months preparing for it. Lauren finally responded. "Understood." Monica continued. "Notify every partner. Suspend all discussions until further review." "Effective immediately?" Lauren asked. "Effective immediately." Lauren did not question the decision. She never did. I will start the process. The call ended. Monica placed her phone on the table and returned her attention to the runway. Nothing about her expression changed. No dramatic reaction. No celebration. No anger. The decision felt less like revenge and more like mathematics. Actions created consequences. The equation was simple. Several floors above the terminal, airline executives were beginning their own morning meetings. Financial projections covered conference room screens. Growth forecasts filled presentation decks. Nobody in those meetings yet realized that the foundation beneath those projections had just started to move. Back in operations, Emma Brooks stared nervously at her phone after sending her message. She had expected no response. Yet a few moments later, a notification appeared. "Thank you for choosing integrity." Emma exhaled slowly. She did not know why those 5 words affected her so strongly. Maybe because the entire day had become a battle between convenience and truth. Maybe because someone finally acknowledged the difference. Across the terminal, Nicole Harper sat in another office reviewing passenger complaints. Her confidence had begun to fade. More witness statements were arriving. More videos were appearing online. Every new piece of information seemed to create another question. A supervisor entered the room carrying a folder. "Corporate wants a complete timeline," he said. Nicole forced a smile. Of course. But the smile never reached her eyes. Somewhere deep inside the company, people were beginning to examine facts instead of assumptions. And facts were far less forgiving. Monica's phone vibrated once more. A short confirmation appeared from Lauren. "Renewal package frozen. Partners notified. Board members alerted." Monica read the message and slipped the phone back into her bag. Around her, travelers continued sipping coffee and checking departure boards, completely unaware that a decision made from a quiet chair beside a rain-covered window had just changed the trajectory of an entire airline. 40 minutes after Monica Reynolds had been removed from the aircraft, the atmosphere inside the airline's corporate headquarters shifted from concern to panic. What began as a customer service issue was rapidly becoming something much larger. Executives who had spent the morning reviewing quarterly projections were now staring at emergency notifications appearing across their screens. Conference room conversations stopped mid-sentence. Financial officers exchanged uneasy looks. Phones rang without pause. Questions multiplied faster than answers. In the executive lounge, Monica remained seated beside the window. The rain had finally begun to ease. Sunlight pushed through the clouds in pale streaks across the runway. Travelers continued moving through the terminal, unaware that events far beyond the airport walls were already in motion. Her phone rang. Lauren Mitchell again. "They know now," Lawrence said. Monica looked out at a departing aircraft. "How many?" "Everyone who matters." Monica nodded once. That was enough. Several minutes later, a group of airline executives entered the terminal at a pace that drew attention from nearby travelers. Their expressions carried none of the confidence usually associated with senior leadership. They looked worried. One of them looked terrified. Leading the group was Chief Executive Officer Richard Lawson. Less than an hour earlier, he had been reviewing expansion plans that depended heavily on Reynolds Capital's financing package. Now he was walking through the terminal searching for a single passenger. Employees stepped aside as the executives passed. Airport staff watched in confusion. Even passengers noticed something unusual about the urgency on their faces. When Richard finally entered the executive lounge, he spotted Monica immediately. She was exactly where she had been all morning. Calm, composed, unmoved by the chaos unfolding around her. Richard approached carefully. "Ms. Reynolds." Several nearby travelers looked up at the name. Monica lifted her eyes from the runway. "Good morning, Richard." The sound of her voice somehow made the situation feel even more serious. Richard forced a smile that vanished almost instantly. "May I sit down?" Monica gestured toward the empty chair across from her. Richard sat. The executives behind him remained standing. Nobody seemed comfortable enough to relax. For a moment, silence settled over the table. Finally, Richard spoke. "I understand there has been a terrible misunderstanding." Monica looked at him steadily. "A misunderstanding?" Richard shifted in his seat. "We are reviewing everything." Monica folded her hands. "Your employees reviewed everything too." Richard's expression tightened. Around them, several travelers had stopped pretending not to listen. The tension was impossible to ignore. Monica continued. "A valid boarding pass was reviewed." Richard said nothing. A verified reservation was reviewed. Still silence. My identity was reviewed. Richard lowered his eyes. Monica's voice remained calm. That made every word land harder. And after reviewing all of it, your company decided I did not belong. Nobody at the table spoke. Nobody could. Monica leaned back slightly. You removed the passenger. Richard closed his eyes briefly. He already knew what was coming. Unfortunately for you, Monica said. That passenger was your future. The words settled over the lounge like a storm cloud. Travelers exchanged stunned looks. Executives stared at the table. Richard looked as though the air had left the room. Monica did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Everyone present now understood the truth. The woman they had dismissed was not merely a customer. She was the founder of Reynolds Capital. She controlled the $5 billion financing package the airline desperately needed. And only minutes earlier, she had frozen every part of it. The silence that followed Monica's revelation spread far beyond the executive lounge. Within minutes, calls began moving through the airline's headquarters at a speed no emergency protocol could match. Board members were pulled from meetings. Financial analysts were asked for updated forecasts. Legal teams were instructed to review every report connected to the morning's incident. What had started as a decision made by a handful of employees was now threatening to become a corporate crisis. Richard Lawson remained seated across from Monica, his expression growing heavier with each passing second. He understood the numbers better than anyone. The financing package from Reynolds Capital was not merely helpful. It was central to the airline's future plans. Fleet modernization, route expansion, debt refinancing. Investors had already been briefed on projections built around those funds. Losing them would force difficult conversations throughout the company. Richard finally spoke. Ms. Reynolds, I hope we can find a path forward. Monica listened quietly. Around them, several travelers continued watching from a respectful distance. The entire lounge seemed to be holding its breath. A path forward requires trust, Monica replied. Trust requires judgment. Richard nodded slowly. I understand. Monica looked directly at him. Do you? The question lingered. Richard did not answer immediately because there was no simple answer to give. Back in the operations office, news of Monica's identity reached employees one department at a time. Nicole Harper learned the truth from a supervisor whose face had gone pale during a conference call. The color drained from Nicole's expression as she listened. Every assumption she had made that morning suddenly looked different. Every decision sounded worse than it had an hour earlier. Across the room, other employees exchanged nervous glances. Nobody was talking about procedures anymore. They were talking about consequences. Emma Brooks sat quietly at her desk as messages flooded internal communication channels. Executives wanted records. Investigators wanted timelines. Compliance teams wanted documentation. For the first time all day, the people asking questions were looking for facts instead of excuses. Outside the terminal, financial markets had not yet reacted, but industry insiders were already paying attention. Rumors spread quickly in aviation. A delayed deal could become a canceled deal. A canceled deal could become a major problem. Monica's phone vibrated. Lauren Mitchell had sent another update. Board members informed. Strategic review initiated. Partner institutions standing by. Monica read the message and set the phone aside. Her calm never changed. That was what unsettled people most. She was not threatening anyone. She was not demanding revenge. She was simply allowing reality to catch up with decisions already made. Richard rubbed his hands together and looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. I am prepared to take immediate action. Monica nodded. That would be wise. Several airline executives shifted uneasily behind him. They had spent years discussing leadership, accountability, and culture in conference rooms. Now those ideas were being tested in real time. Through the lounge windows, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. Aircraft moved along the runways beneath a clearing sky. The storm outside had ended. The one inside the airline was only beginning. And as executives rushed to contain the damage, one truth became impossible to ignore. The crisis was never created by a financing decision. It was created the moment people decided that appearance mattered more than facts. An hour after the first video appeared online, the airport felt strangely different. The rush was still there. The announcements still echoed through the terminal. Aircraft still lifted into the afternoon sky. Yet for the people directly involved, The day had divided itself into two separate chapters. There was the moment before the truth surfaced, and there was everything that came after. Monica Reynolds stood from her chair and gathered her belongings. The executive lounge had grown quieter. Travelers who recognized her watched respectfully from a distance. Some nodded as she passed. Others simply observed in silence. Across the room, Richard Lawson rose to his feet as well. So did the executives who had accompanied him. Their expressions carried the weight of a lesson learned the hard way. "Ms. Reynolds," Richard said carefully. Monica paused. "Yes." Richard took a slow breath. "I cannot change what happened this morning." Monica regarded him calmly. "No, you cannot. But I intend to make certain this company learns from it." For the first time since he arrived, Monica saw sincerity instead of strategy. It did not erase the damage. It did not erase the decisions that had already been made. But it mattered. She nodded once. "Then start with facts." Richard lowered his head slightly. "We will." Monica turned toward the windows one final time. The storm clouds were gone now. Bright sunlight reflected across the runway. For a moment, she simply stood there watching aircraft rise into the sky. The sight reminded her of why she had spent her life building. Not to prove people wrong, not to collect power, but to create opportunities that could not be taken away by someone else's assumptions. Her phone vibrated. A final message from Lauren appeared. "Strategic review complete. Awaiting your decision." Monica read the message and smiled faintly. The financing package remained frozen. The future remained uncertain. Yet something more important had already been decided. The real outcome of the day had never been about money. It had been about accountability. Nearby, Emma Brooks watched from the entrance of the lounge. She had never spoken directly with Monica. She had simply chosen honesty when it mattered. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Monica offered a small nod of appreciation. Emma returned it. No words were necessary. Sometimes courage arrived quietly. Monica stepped toward the exit. Travelers moved aside as she passed. Not because of her title, not because of her wealth, because they understood what they had witnessed. Outside the terminal, a black sedan waited at the curb. Monica paused before entering and looked back at the airport one last time. Airports connected people. Airlines connected cities. Businesses connected economies. But respect connected everything. Without it, even the strongest systems eventually failed. She opened the car door and settled into the back seat. As the vehicle pulled away, sunlight flooded the terminal behind her. The day had started with someone deciding she did not belong. It ended with an entire company confronting the cost of that assumption. Monica looked out the window and quietly reflected on a lesson she had learned decades earlier. You do not raise standards by raising your voice. You raise standards by refusing to lower them. And somewhere behind her, inside a company forced to face its own reflection, that lesson had finally begun to take root.